Hi guys. I don't know if it's obvious, but like I like weird stuff. I'm part of a lot of fandoms. I mean, it's pretty obvious because I'm into musical theater and I like Saw. We're doing My Little Pony and I'm planning to do a video on the new season of Hazbin Hotel. We're doing a My Little Pony video, a video on the quarter zip trend, and then Hazbin Hotel. And then I'm doing a video on the psychology of book talk. Listen, I'm a woman of many facets. Hi, if you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're not new, then welcome back. When it comes to kids' cartoons, few shows have blown up across age groups quite like My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Lauren Faust launched it in 2010 on The Hub, and it wasn't just another show for toys. It set out to flip the script on what girls' cartoons really could be. Thanks to the network's rules, every episode had to teach a clear social or emotional lesson. That's why you see so many stories, especially in the very beginning of the show, ending with a letter to Princess Celestia, spelling out the moral of the day that they learned. But here's the twist. The show wasn't just balancing fun stories with toy sales. It was also wrestling with big creative ambitions, strict network mandates, and the messy realities of how people actually connect. And because of that, not every moral landed. On the surface, Friendship is Magic looks like a pastel utopia. But if you dig deeper, you'll find a surprisingly complex mix of psychology and sociology. Some episodes nail healthy ways of relating, while others slip into flawed or even problematic tropes. So, today I'm going to be breaking down every single episode in season 1 of My Little Pony. I'm not just going to be recapping, I'm asking if these lessons really hold up today. To do that, I'm pulling from psychology, attachment theory, family systems, even CPT, and mixing in media critiques on colonialism and gender roles. Out of all that, I built my own framework, not just for this season, but if we do decide to go to future seasons or to the Equestria Girls movies, the same framework I'm going to be using for all of these. So I'm using what I call the Pony criteria: practicality, originality, narrative, execution, and yield. To explain the Pony framework a little more, not every friendship lesson in the show is created equal. Some are just warm fuzzies, while others give fundamental tools for handling life. To sort them out, I built the Pony criteria. Practicality: can the lesson actually be applied to real life situations? Does it help with emotional regulation or conflict resolution, or does it just fall apart once you apply cartoon magic? Originality: is the message fresh, or does it use tired tropes like the damsel in distress or the idea that everyone has to get along no matter what? Narrative execution: does the story earn its moral through genuine character growth, or does it rely on a convenient plot device swooping in at the very last second? And lastly, yield: what's the overall impact on the viewer's social emotional toolkit? Does it leave us with a healthier takeaway, or does it risk reinforcing stereotypes and toxic behaviors? Using this framework, I'm going to break down all 26 episodes of season 1, not in airing order, but ranking them based on how well their lessons really hold up. While entertainment does still matter, the greater weight falls on how meaningful and well told these lessons truly are. I want to give a quick disclaimer. Throughout this show, a lot of the opening and ending episodes are two-parters. If they are two-parters, I'm going to combine it into one on these lists. My Little Pony. My Little Pony. I used to wonder what friendship could be. Anyways, let's start with the episodes that struggled the most. These are the episodes with unclear messages, problematic undertones, or storytelling that honestly doesn't hold together. They score low on my Pony framework because their lessons are either confusing, poorly delivered, or unintentionally harmful. The worst of the worst is number 25, Over a Barrel. Over a Barrel lands at the very bottom of my ranking because frankly, it fails on almost every level of the Pony scale. Instead of subverting colonial tropes, the episode leans right into them, taking a deeply serious subject, settler-indigenous conflict, and land displacement, and framing it as a simple miscommunication. The narrative pushes the idea that both sides are equally at fault. When we look at the actual lesson being taught, it falls apart by suggesting that systematic issues can be smoothed over with a shared dessert. It completely glosses over the real power dynamics at play. In the real world, conflict resolution requires acknowledging harm, not just sharing a pie. Ultimately, the story cheats its way to a happy ending. It shortcuts past any genuine accountability to get a quick, convenient compromise. The result is a message that is honestly confusing for young viewers, implying that justice is just about being polite and keeping the peace, rather than actually addressing the root of the harm. Number 24, Bridal Gossip. Bridal gossip tries to take a massive social issue, xenophobia, and for a moment it actually feels like it's going to work. The setup captures the psychology of mob mentality perfectly. It is genuinely uncomfortable to watch the main six abandon reason and trespass on boundaries just because of their own paranoia. It effectively shows how fear creates an enemy out of nothing, which is a very real practical dynamic. But the show completely sabotages itself with the execution. While the lesson tells us to not judge people who are different, the visual storytelling relies on lazy tropes to defy Zecora. By showing her with rhyming and tribal aesthetics, the creators are actively engaging in the same stereotyping that they should be dismantling. The resolution attempts to redeem the characters by having them apologize before Zecora cures them. However, this apology only comes after an immediate confrontation, and after the ponies have spent the entire episode leaning aggressively into their biases. This moment feels reactive rather than empathetic. For a show aimed at children, projecting a don't judge a book by its cover lesson onto a character who's the epitome of these stereotypes can be messy. It suggests that prejudices are only worth dismantling when you are forced to face the victim directly, placing the emotional burden on the outsider to be gracious and helpful in the face of bigotry, rather than teaching that the bias should have never existed in the first place. Number 23. Feeling Pinky Keen. Feeling Pinky Keen is a controversial entry for good reason. It sets up a classic conflict between logic and intuition. Twilight trying to make sense of Pinkie Pie's precognitive abilities, but instead of encouraging curiosity or finding a balance, the narrative actively punishes Twilight's skepticism with relentless slapstick. The framing here is counterproductive. It equates scientific questions with arrogance and treats the act of asking questions as a character flaw that needs to be corrected. Narratively, Twilight doesn't learn to respect a different perspective through growth. She's simply beaten down until she submits to blind faith. The takeaway here is genuinely troubling for young critical thinkers. The idea that some things you just have to believe in without evidence. It completely dismisses the value of intellectual questions. Instead of a lesson on boundaries or empathy, we get a confused moral that suggests giving up on understanding is better than seeking the truth. Number 22, Boastbusters. Boastbusters is a frustrating entry because it has such a strong psychological setup, but it completely fumbles. On paper, it's a brilliant exploration of a very real anxiety, Twilight's paralyzing fear of appearing arrogant. We have Trixie, a classic narcissist, contrasted against Twilight, who is so terrified of being perceived as a show-off that she lets her friends get humiliated rather than stepping up. A surprisingly deep look at the pressure to dim your own light just to keep the peace. But instead of a clear lesson on humility versus confidence, we watch the main six heckle a stage performer, which blurs the line between defending their town and just bullying someone they find annoying. Ultimately, the narrative relies on a convenient plot device, the Ursa Minor, to force the ending. Twilight doesn't resolve her eternal conflict through a meaningful breakthrough or heart-to-heart with her friends. She is simply backed into a corner and forced to act. The resulting takeaway is confusing and potentially harmful, suggesting that talent should be hidden until it is absolutely necessary, rather than encouraging healthy self-expression. Number 21, Swarm of the Century. Swarm of the Century presents us with the literal civilization-ending plague of cuteness, which should be the perfect backdrop for a lesson on cognitive flexibility. The episode wants to teach us that Twilight's rigid, by-the-book anxiety isn't the only way to handle a crisis, and that she needs to learn to trust Pinkie Pie's chaotic intuition. But the conflict relies entirely on a forced communication breakdown that feels artificial. Pinkie Pie isn't just operating on a different wavelength. She's actively withholding the solution while her friends are in full-blown panic. The friends' frustration isn't a character flaw to overcome. It is an entirely rational response to someone failing to communicate during an emergency. Because Pinkie Pie chooses a silent scavenger hunt over simply using her words, the resolution feels unearned. The resulting takeaway isn't trust your friends' unique perspectives, but rather a flimsy and impractical idea that you should blindly follow someone's nonsense without question, even when the stakes are life and death. Number 20, A Bird in the Hoof. A Bird in the Hoof attempts to deliver a genuinely sound practical life lesson. Don't jump to conclusions. We watch Fluttershy project her own anxieties onto a molting bird, mistaking a natural life cycle for a crisis. It's a solid setup for exploring how our desire to be a savior can actually lead us to interfere where we aren't needed. The problem is that the narrative execution forces the characters to abandon all common sense just to make the plot happen. To get to the moral, the script requires Fluttershy, usually the most empathetic and careful pony, to essentially steal a pet from royalty without asking a single question. While the final takeaway is about patience and curiosity, and is important, the road to get there feels artificially paved with bad decisions. It implies that the only way to learn this lesson is through a total breakdown of miscommunication, making the conflict feel made up rather than a natural result of character flaws. Number 19, Owl's Well That Ends Well. Owl's Well That Ends Well attempts to tackle a heavy psychological theme, displacement anxiety. It takes the classic new sibling dynamic where Spike spirals into panic because he believes he is being replaced by the perfect new assistant. We see clearly how insecurity drives us to act out, but the episode fails its own lesson because of how it handles the caregiver role. Twilight doesn't just miss the signs, she actively invalidates Spike's feelings and at times borders on gaslighting him about the owl's behavior. Instead of modeling secure attachment where a guardian reassures a frightened child, the narrative frames spikes jealousy as a moral failing. The takeaway is surprisingly toxic. It implies that your insecurities are just annoying flaws rather than calls for connection, and that you don't deserve empathy or reassurance until you stop being difficult. Number 18, the showstoppers. The Showstoppers gives us a front row seat to the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. We watch the Cutie Mark Crusaders confidently force themselves into roles they are objectively terrible at, ignoring their natural talents to chase a fantasy. To the episode's credit, it allows them to fail, loudly and publicly. However, the narrative completely mishandles the recovery. Instead of using that failure as a moment for self-reflection or a pivot towards their actual strengths, the girls misinterpret the audience's laughter and decide they are meant to be comedians. While there is some value in seeing their resilience, the practical lesson is incredibly muddled. It misses a golden opportunity to model how children can process failure and develop self-awareness. Instead of learning to recognize their own limitations, the characters simply swap one delusion for another, leaving us with a moral that celebrates blind persistence over actual growth. Leaving the bottom tier of our list behind, we're now entering the territory of good intentions but messy executions. These episodes offer genuinely solid lessons and much healthier takeaways, but they're still held back by cliche tropes or reliance on cartoon physics that keep them from reaching their full potential. Continuing our conversation with the Cutie Mark Crusaders, we have number 17, Call of the Cutie. Call of the Cutie works as a surprisingly sharp allegory for puberty and the anxiety of being a late bloomer. Apple Bloom's obsession with her blank flank perfectly captures the fear of being left behind while everyone else develops around you. However, the episode struggles with how it handles the external conflict. Apple Bloom is facing genuine social exclusion and bullying, yet the adult response, Applejack effectively telling her that it's not a big deal and that she just has to wait, minimizes her pain. It misses a chance to model how caregivers should validate a child's distress. Narratively, the resolution does save it. Instead of magically getting her mark, Apple Bloom finds her group. Forming the Cutie Mark Crusaders shifts the focus from fixing the self to finding a community. It's a solid social survival strategy, even if simply joining a club feels a little bit of a band-aid for the bullying that she's actually facing. Continuing the conversation about cutie marks, we have number 16, the Cutie Mark Chronicles. The Cutie Mark Chronicles is a massive hit for lore lovers, serving as the origin stories we've been waiting for. Narratively, weaving all 6 destinies together through a single event, the Sonic Rainboom, is a brilliant stroke of writing that creates a deep sense of unity and shared history. But it leans heavily on the concept of fate rather than agency. Instead of modeling how to find your identity through trial and error or self-discovery, the story suggests that your path is somewhat magically predetermined by a cosmic event. While it scores high on the emotional scale, the actual lesson is more inspiring than instructive. It teaches us that we are all connected, which is beautiful and very sweet, but it doesn't offer much advice on how to navigate the messy, non-magical process of growing up and finding your purpose. Number 15, the Stairmaster. Stairmaster gives us a classic babysitting setup, but relies a bit too heavily on standard sitcom tropes to get there. We watch Fluttershy struggle with a permissive caregiving style, letting the Crusaders run wild until she is completely overwhelmed. The episode loses points on practicality because of its resolution, the stare. While cool to watch, using a magical hypnotic gaze to enforce discipline is a bit of a cheat code. It treats behavioral management as a superpower rather than a skill, which limits the education value for anyone actually trying to manage difficult kids. However, the episode redeems itself with a deeper lesson on capacity. Much like Rarity, Fluttershy learns a hard truth about overextending herself. The narrative ultimately succeeds by showing that even the most patient caregiver has limits, and that recognizing your own boundaries is just as important as being kind. Continuing on the episodes about Fluttershy, we have number 14, Dragonshy. Dragonshy tries to tell a story about overcoming anxiety, but from a psychological standpoint, the execution is a disaster. The episode wants to show friends helping someone face a phobia, but what we actually see is a concept called flooding, forcing someone into a traumatic situation without their consent or the proper tools. The group fails completely as a support system. Instead of offering gradual desensitization or empathy, they are shockingly dismissive of Fluttershy's valid terror, literally dragging her up the mountain against her will. Rainbow Dash in particular treats a legitimate phobia as a personal annoyance. Narratively, the resolution is fascinating because it is accidental. Fluttershy doesn't overcome her fear because her friends encouraged her. She overcomes it because their incompetence puts them in danger, triggering her protective anger. The unintentional lesson here is surprisingly cynical. Sometimes your friends won't understand your boundaries, and the only way to get things done is to get mad enough to handle it yourself. Number 13, the Ticketmaster. The Ticketmaster throws us immediately into a nightmare of resource scarcity. We watch Twilight struggle as her friends' kind gestures quickly degrade into transactional bribery and emotional guilt trips. It creates a fantastic high-pressure setup for learning how to enforce boundaries. However, the narrative framing is a little shaky. Considering these ponies just met, this is the second episode in the series, technically the third because the first 2 episodes was a two-parter. Their entitlement to Twilight's royal access makes the friendship dynamic feel incredibly one-sided and selfish. The real issue here lies in the resolution, though. The ending relies on a massive narrative cop-out. Celestia magically sends enough tickets for everyone. This completely neutralizes the moral stakes. Instead of forcing Twilight to make a difficult decision and navigate a messy reality of disappointing people she cares about, the show lets her off the hook. It teaches avoidance rather than accountability, suggesting that if you panic long enough, an authority figure will swoop in and fix the scarcity problem for you. Number 12. The Friendship is Magic Parts 1 and 2. The series premiere, Friendship is Magic, does the heavy lifting of world building, but its real strength is psychological. We start with Twilight Sparkle, a protagonist who actively resists connection. She treats friendship as an academic distraction rather than a basic need, which gives her arc from isolation to cooperation a solid emotional core. Narratively, the two-parter works because the supporting cast isn't just there for decoration. Their specific personality traits, generosity, loyalty, honesty, are necessary to move the plot forward. It proves that the group needs each other to function. However, the resolution is where the show reveals its limitations. Instead of a complex social negotiation with Nightmare Moon, we get a magical rainbow laser beam that blasts the bad guy into submission. While it successfully establishes the series' central theme that true strength comes from cooperation rather than raw power, the actual mechanic of conflict resolution is still a bit simplistic compared to the emotional complexity that the show achieves later on. Number 11. Fall Weather Friends. Fall Weather Friends delivers a solid standard lesson on sportsmanship, but it misses the mark for the top tier because of a few character flaws. The episode is a perfect case study of how healthy competition can turn into a toxic obsession. We watch Rainbow Dash and Applejack become so fixated on beating each other that they completely lose sight of the actual goal. They aren't running a race anymore, they are trying to humiliate each other, which is a very different and much less healthy motivation. However, the narrative execution stumbles significantly when it comes to Applejack. Watching the literal element of honesty resort to underhanded tactics and cheating feels like a betrayal of her core values just to make the plot work. It breaks the immersion to see her compromise her integrity so quickly, while the ending, where Twilight gets fifth by taking her time, is a clever, ironic twist on the tortoise and the hare. The story relies on mutual sabotage to get there. The takeaway is valid: cheaters never prosper, but seeing our heroes abandon their principles so easily makes the lesson feel a bit generic compared to the deeper character work we know that the show is capable of. Number 10. Party of One. Party of One earns its spot here because it offers a surprisingly raw look at how insecurity can sabotage us. We watch Pinkie Pie take a lack of information, her friends being secretive, and immediately spin it into a narrative of total abandonment. She convinces herself that she knows exactly what her friends are thinking without ever actually asking them. The episode is famous for Pinkie's mental break, and while it is played for laughs, watching her interrogate a bag of flour is a genuinely intense depiction of isolation. It suggests that her confidence is actually quite fragile and dependent on constant reassurance from others. However, the resolution brings it back to a healthy place. It proves that the entire spire was unnecessary and could have been fixed with a little trust. The lesson is incredibly practical. Check your facts before you panic. It reminds us that open communication, not silent suspicion, is the only thing that keeps a friendship on solid ground. Number 9. Look Before You Sleep. Look Before You Sleep creates the perfect psychological pressure cooker by trapping the show's two most opposed personalities, Applejack and Rarity, in a single room during a storm. It takes the classic trope and executes it with surprising depth. Narratively, the episode is smart because it doesn't just tell us their bickering is a problem, it manifests that conflict physically. Their inability to compromise literally tears the roof off of the house. The destruction of the library serves as a perfect metaphor for how unchecked interpersonal conflict eventually causes collateral damage to the people around you. In this case, poor Twilight. What pushes this episode into the top 10 is the resolution. It avoids a superficial just get along moral. Instead, it requires genuine vulnerability. Applejack has to actively apologize for being dismissive and admit that Rarity's perspective, which she had written off as frivolous, actually has practical value. The lesson is incredibly mature. You don't have to be the same to respect each other. It validates that different approaches to life can coexist, provided there is mutual respect at the foundation. Transitioning to another episode about Rarity, we have number 8. Rarity has a lot of top 10 episodes this season, my bad. Number 8, Sonic Rain Boom. Sonic Rain Boom lands high on the list because it captures the terror of performance anxiety perfectly. We see Rainbow Dash, usually the most confident character, completely paralyzed by the pressure of her own expectations. It's a grounded, relatable depiction of how fear can silence even the most talented people. However, the episode is complicated by Rarity. Her arc here is a fascinating yet frustrating look at how quickly validation can turn into narcissism. She gets a taste of power, beautiful wings, and immediately pivots from being a supportive friend to stealing the spotlight. Narratively, the climax is iconic. The Sonic Rainbow isn't just a cool visual. It's the physical manifestation of Rainbow Dash breaking through her mental block. But the emotional resolution feels a little unbalanced. Rarity only realizes she was wrong after a near-death experience, which makes her apology feel reactive rather than a genuine realization. The lesson is solid. Don't let your ego overshadow your friends. But it would have been stronger if Rarity had noticed her mistake before she started plummeting from the sky. Number 7 is another episode about Rarity. It is a dog and pony show. A dog and pony show stands out because it takes the oldest gender trope in the book, the damsel in distress, and completely flips it. We expect Spike to be the hero, but the episode argues that Rarity's femininity is actually a strength, not a weakness. She proves that you don't need to be masculine or physically tough to be powerful. However, we have to be honest about the practicality here, because the resolution is actually pretty risky. Rarity escapes a literal kidnapping scenario by complaining and whining until her captors let her go. While it is hilarious in the context of a cartoon, if we look at this realistically, it is a dangerous message. In a real-world, high-stakes situation involving abduction, antagonizing your captors is generally the last thing you want to do. The episode plays it for laughs, but it presents a survival strategy that relies entirely on the enemies being incompetent. It's an empowering character moment for Rarity, sure, but as a life lesson, it offers advice that is completely detached from reality. We have finally arrived to the top 6. These are the gold standards. These are the episodes where the writing transcends the genre and delivers something truly valuable. We aren't just talking about good storytelling anymore. These episodes offer nuanced, actionable advice that holds up. They don't rely on magic just to fix problems. They rely on empathy, boundaries, and genuine growth. Number 6, Winter Wrap-Up. Winter Wrap-Up lands at number 6 because it validates a skill that is never celebrated in children's media: management. We watch Twilight spiral through a fish-out-of-water crisis, failing miserably at every physical task because her usual tool, magic, is forbidden. The episode does something significant here. It validates intellectual labor as a tangible contribution. It counters the idea that real work must be physical, showing that organization skills are just as vital as clearing snow or waking up animals. For any kid or adult who feels more like a planner than a doer, seeing Twilight save the day with a clipboard and a checklist is incredibly affirming. However, I do have to dock it slightly on originality. The core moral that everyone has a special talent is one of the oldest lessons in the book. While true, it's not exactly groundbreaking. Furthermore, the resolution is entirely internal. It's about Twilight's individual self-discovery rather than a complex interpersonal dynamic. It's a charming, well-executed story about finding your niche, even if it feels slightly adjacent to the show's deeper themes of connection and mutual support. Number 5, The Best Night Ever. The Best Night Ever earns a top spot because it is essentially a masterclass in managing expectations. The characters are dealing with a textbook case of Paris syndrome, the severe distress caused when the reality of a place completely fails to live up to the idealized fantasy. For an entire season, the show built up the Grand Galloping Gala as the ultimate goal. A lesser show would have let them have their perfect night. Instead, the episode systematically dismantles every single fairy tale trope. The prince isn't charming, he's an asshole. The animals don't want to be cuddled, and the high society networking that both Twilight and Applejack expected is cold and dismissive. The brilliance lies in the resolution. The lesson isn't that they just needed to try harder to fit in. It's that resilience in the face of social disaster that is built through solidarity. The ending at the donut shop teaches a highly mature lesson. A bad experience doesn't have to be a traumatic memory if you have the right people to laugh about it with. It reframes failure into connection, proving that the company you keep matters more than the event that you attended. Number 4, Griffin the Brush-Off. Griffin the Brush-Off lands at number 4 because it bravely subverts one of the most common tropes in children's media, the idea that you have to be friends with everyone. It tackles a messy, sophisticated social dilemma. What do you do when your new friend's oldest friend turns out to be a jerk? The episode does meaningful work by distinguishing fun, pranks, and bullying. It draws a clear line. Pranks are about connection, but what Gilda does is about power and dominance. The episode validates Pinkie Pie's gut instinct that something is wrong, even when Rainbow Dash is wearing rose-colored glasses. However, I have to be critical of the narrative execution. Pinkie Pie's solution, throwing a party to fix Glinda's attitude, is a bit conflict avoidant and passive-aggressive. Instead of communicating her concerns to Rainbow Dash directly, she relies on a scheme. But the yield of the episode is incredibly high. It proves a necessary framework for identifying gaslighting and toxic loyalty. The resolution teaches viewers that history doesn't excuse abuse. It validates the decision to cut ties with toxic individuals, proving that you can't force a friendship to work if the other person refuses to respect your boundaries. Number 3, Applebuck Season. Apple Book season takes this spot because it serves as a brutal physical representation of burnout. It is a perfect case study in the overfunctioning trap, the belief that asking for help is a sign of failure. The episode works so well because it systematically dismantles the hero complex. Applejack believes her stubborn independence is a virtue, but the narrative proves the exact opposite. We watch a domino effect of chaos, from poisoning the townsfolk with bad muffins to causing a bunny stampede, that demonstrates exactly how one person's refusal to delegate eventually hurts the entire community. The yield here reframes the concept of help. The episode teaches us that hyper-independence isn't a strength. It actually can be a liability, and it can create more work for everyone else. While the story is structurally simple, almost like a fable, the lesson is undeniable. You can't be a pillar of your community if you are crumbling under the weight of your own pride. Number 2, suited for success. Suited for Success is, without a doubt, a great example of professional boundaries. It captures a specific painful reality known to anyone in a creative field, the nightmare of design by committee. We watch Rarity fall into a classic people-pleasing trap. She effectively abandons her artistic integrity to satisfy her friends who have no idea what they actually want. The harder she tries to accommodate every request, the worse the product becomes. The resulting bad dresses aren't just ugly, they are physical proof of what happens when you let non-experts dictate your work. What pushes this episode so high on the list is the resolution. The narrative doesn't demonize her friends, but it forces them to take accountability. The apology works because they don't just say sorry for being difficult. They explicitly acknowledge that they lacked the expertise to critique her work. The yield here is incredibly empowering. It validates the professional's right to set boundaries and teaches us that trying to please everybody eventually results in pleasing no one, least of all, yourself. Finally, we reached the number 1 spot. I did kind of already tease that Rarity has so many high episodes this season, but she does. Number 1 is Green Isn't Your Color. This episode takes the top spot because it offers the most sophisticated look at adult friendship in the entire season. It tackles a deeply uncomfortable reality, professional jealousy. Most children's shows would paint Rarity's envy as villainous, but here, the narrative validates a complex emotional duality. It shows that it is possible to genuinely love a friend while simultaneously resenting their success. Rarity is heartbroken that her dream is being handed to someone else, and Fluttershy is miserable because she is living a life that she never wanted just to please Rarity. A villain doesn't cause the tension here, it is caused by white lies. Both characters think they're doing the right thing by suppressing their true feelings to protect the other, but the episode brilliantly deconstructs this, showing that silence is actually the enemy of intimacy. The resolution is the strongest in the season because it requires vulnerability. Rarity has to admit to the ugly feelings of jealousy, and Fluttershy has to admit to her own unhappiness. The yield is a great lesson for viewers of any age. True friendship can survive envy and disappointment, but it can't survive secrecy. It teaches us that difficult, honest conversations are the only way to bridge the gap between who we are and who we want to be. Looking back on season 1 in its entirety, we see a show that is filled with both promise and undeniable growing pains. On one hand, we have episodes that stumble, trying to apply friendship logic to a complex systematic issues like colonialism or prejudice, often resulting in muddled or even harmful messages. But on the other hand, when the season hits, it hits hard. We saw a girls' cartoon tackle surprisingly mature themes like professional jealousy, burnout, and the paralyzing fear of failure. It proved that these characters aren't just archetypes, they are complex figures navigating a world that doesn't always make sense. Ultimately, the value of season 1 isn't that it's perfect. Its value lies in its honesty. It established the show's core thesis that friendship isn't just a state of perfect harmony. It is an active, ongoing journey of egos, boundaries, and vulnerability. It taught us that connection is messy, difficult work, but the work is exactly what makes the magic real. Now I want to turn it over to you guys. Do you agree with my top pick? Do you think I was too harsh on some of the lower episodes in this list? Also, this is just the beginning. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I would love to do the same analysis for the rest of the 8 seasons along with the Equestria Girls movies. I've been a part of the My Little Pony fandom for years, and now that I have a channel, I could really talk about it and really build a community with people. It's something I never really got to experience. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into this. So please drop a comment below with your personal ranking and let me know if you want to see this series continue. I read and reply to every single comment. So I would love to hear what you guys think. If you like this video, please like this video, and I will see you guys all on the next take. Bye-bye. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.